Science, religion, and politics, the three-headed monster. The 21st century has brought many socio-political and technological changes which have enhanced the quality and longevity of life. As we progressively invest more and more time and effort in the realm of science, we grapple with the notion of science, religion, and politics coexisting in a sane world. Truly an age of rapid growth, science answers more and more questions as time progresses. And more likely than not, we will have an answer to all of our age-long questions. Ultimately, we must recognize how intertwined the three worlds are on a physical and spiritual level by dissecting the roots. In The Nature of Things, Lucretius dives into various aspects of life and nullifies the argument that nothing can come from nothing. The progression of his book accurately depicts the direction of analyzing our externalities from our physical phenomena, fear, vision, nature, and space. Humanity has an interesting way of perceiving things as it occurs in our daily lives. As science constantly comes to new knowledge for us as humans to take and implement, skepticism grows, and people start to become hesitant and receptive to the changes in our environment and the direction we are headed. In some cases, science is definitely ignored in the sense that people of different political party affiliations tend to nullify the research that these scientists have done and come up with the results that they have. For the issue of climate change, ignoring what scientists are suggesting is a surefire way to implode as a community, both physically and spiritually. Through genome editing, AI, robotics, and even new prosthetic to replace limbs, we as a society are changing what it means to be human even. To rationally think about something benefiting a human being through means of increasing their lifespan can be a truly life-changing experience for the recipient. Although bearing the fruits of science can be particularly healthy, we must also acknowledge the fact that science may be counterintuitive in the sense that there are many issues with genetically modified organisms and human health. Humans in animal clothing tends to increase moral and ethical questions, which we as a society are not ready to answer yet until we grasp a full understanding of the topic. All these issues are those which can impact the political scene to a very drastic extent, due to the fact that not many individuals on a day-to-day basis, speaking from purely individual stance, are aware or in direct contact with science. This disables them from viewing the actualities of some of these claims, which further divides the spectrum of science and politics. The act of engaging in scientific research and its subsequently leading to social activity is by definition the amalgamation of science and politics. We can turn to legislation introduced and passed in 2006, the Global Warming Solution Act of 2006, which shows that policymakers in a state of acknowledgement that the release of greenhouse gases throughout the course of the 1990s and how pollution has adversely affected our atmosphere and condition of living to this date. This act required that companies have an emissions limit and that companies subsequently track their emissions as well. Aside from political change, we as a society are acting upon these changes now. Nowadays, we see release of more energy-efficient cars, trains, and buses. Of course, solar energy has extremely high installation costs. However, the cost-benefit over time is incomparable to using electricity and depleting our world's natural resources. Through the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2016, we see the government rewarding its citizens for the act of using solar and wind energy. The act renewed tax credit programs for companies using these forms of energy and establishing a whole new spectrum of normality in our society. Taking a step back and looking at the time of Lucretius, heresy was considered a crime, in worst cases, punishable by even death. The combination of religion and politics served to be a juggernaut in the sense that the church had most power in dictating day-to-day life. Many people would be appalled by the notion that somebody could even theorize something that combats the philosophy of the church. This is primarily one of the reasons why Lucretius opens the book with a prayer to Venus, which highlighted the savagery of business associated with warfare. Lucretius, although not an atheist, was the first to propose that the world can be in which contemporary science is distinguishable by the world run by religion, which was directly tied to politics at the time. A major part in why this book resurfaced during the Renaissance was due to the difference in thinking and ideology by philosophers during that time. All of a sudden, Lucretian objection to divine and spiritual theology did not seem too far-fetched because the explanation of nature provided an ideal which could be comprehended objectively, and not perceived as a threat to politics. Science and religion have always been at a constant odd from the beginning of principal theory of science. Many ancient philosophers, such as Galileo, were accused of heresy for discovering some fundamental theories of today. Today, people don't simply believe in God in a traditional standpoint. Although there's no evidence to prove or disprove the existence of a higher force, the power of God falls in the hands of individuals or groups who perform good deeds out of fear of punishment. This is exactly what drove the argument Lucretius was trying to make in Book 3. We must banish the fear of death. Lucretius's philosophy and intent was to exonerate people from the fear of death if the gods were to be offended. He challenged individuals to be inquisitive and to view life past the lens of changes and manipulations imposed by those in power. Jumping to modern theology, many innovations prior to the scientific revolution were obtained by religious institutions. Although it may seem as if science and religion are at a constant quarrel, we must reconcile these differences and see through a lens that they're actually inherently tied. Some even believe that science and religion are intertwined in the level that they're both explanations for our world in different senses. Science deals with and explains the natural world and deals with issues for how they are, and religion deals with the supernatural. The two issues can be considered complementary, and this is also the reason why people agree that there shouldn't be any persistent conflict between the two. For this very reason, more than half of all scientists who work in the respective fields believe in God, contrary to what one may assume. The most fundamental concept of religion is the importance of being a good human being, and not doing anything wrong or sinful. The sheer possibility of the existence of a supernatural being is enough to keep most religious people in line with their faith and leading a life of prosperity. This is not to suggest that science and religion have always agreed with one another. There have always been exceptions, in all cases in history, and the exception was in the sense that there are individuals who believe that the world was created in 6 days, and also subsequently people who believe in ancient origin stories, which were passed down orally through the word of mouth and in ancient times as well. These stories are held with great faith by those who devoutly practice their religious perspective. In life, though, we must view the natural world through an evidence-based lens. Those who choose to carry on a specific faith must view their faith through a religious lens. Different interpretations of a situation can enable us to live a life in which science and religion are not at a constant conflict. Lucretius dives into an explanation of our physical world through mentioning the existence of atoms and accepting the stance that nothing ever springs miraculously from nothing. The two kinds of bodies are to be distinguished. There are primary elements of things, objects compounded of primary elements, and as for the primary elements, no force has the power to extinguish them. The ultimate particles are solid and contain no void. This quote describes how, in theory, all things are created from a definite, appointed substance. Lucretius's worldview coincides with the theory taught in all introduction to biology courses. All life comes from a microscopic organism which was able to fixate high concentrations of nitrogen on the primitive Earth's atmosphere. Subsequently, a supersaturation of oxygen produced by plants underwater, the oxygen was leaked into the atmosphere, leading to the creation of the ozone, catalyzed by the nitrogenous atmosphere, allowing us to be protected by the deadly rays of the sun. One scientific theory that directly combats Lucretian philosophy is the Big Bang theory, which in essence, at its basic level, contends that something came from nothing. The expansion of our already infinite universe is something that can be observed by scientists today, and is slowly the notion of us not being the only organisms starting to surface. Not everyone has to assume that aliens are big green figures with antennas, and as science fiction tends to depict, an extraterrestrial organism can be any cell, bacteria that exists or is able to be sustained on a planet other than Earth. Overall, the idea of alien life does not seem too far-fetched. In order to understand the idea of science and religion, it must be very important to deem a distinction of the relationship between politics and religion, because since the beginning of recorded history, these two have been in constant conflict with one another, or even in a constant relationship. As one mentioned before, the separation of church and state is one that did not occur during the 18th century, or until the 18th century. To think about how religion and politics have been tied since the beginning of recorded history is definitely one to take in perspective. Religion, since it's such a fundamental concept of humanity, has produced so much power in the history of time that it has taken over control of politics in its most primitive sense. The church had so much power in early times, which allowed it to undertake jurisdiction over people's lives if they were opposed to the views of the church. Taking a look at the trials of Socrates, he was accused of corrupting the youth because of his rational thinking. If he were to renounce his work, years of hard work and research would serve to be futile. Needless to say, he stands by his work and ultimately dies a very noble death. As a whole, societies will always contain gadflies, those who initiate and propagate change in the realm of society as a whole. Placing a man in a situation where he has to combat his own feelings and beliefs is contrary to what we may assume is acceptable in a free society. By not allowing people to speak their minds, it is effectively a stain on democracy as a whole. Individuals in society must take a stance of epistemic humility, able to distinguish what is known and what is not known. Through acknowledgement of these virtues, one may be able to live a more purposeful and ethical life. Although we do need to distinguish the differences between what is false and what is real, individuals, through relying on their senses, are able to outweigh and even their own intuition and gut feelings. Sensation is the prime distinguishing factor that humans possess, which we are able to perceive our natural world. As Lucretius argues, the nature of God's existing is so tenuous and far removed from our senses that we are not able to perceive this and take into perspective in our minds. The concept of the supernatural, as opposed to previous times, is now viewed in a more practical sense in terms of our legislation today. The First Amendment, ratified in 1791, states that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Through this statement, we are able to exercise our basic human rights. There is no formal statement in the Constitution about separation between church and state, although it is implicitly implied throughout the course of the document. A secular state is one in which the relationship between the religious organizations and the nation-state is different and do not have any bearing on legal structures. Through the analysis of the French and Mexican Revolution, we can objectively see the hostility which arose to the implementation of political religion. As separation exists today, we have the freedom to practice what we please, and, to be honest, what we even have the autonomy and the choice and our deliberation. Even though we as society have come so far, we still have a long ways to go before all individuals in society are happy beyond the realm of racism and socio-political issues that even exist to this day. Although the world is exceedingly old relative to our lives, as deemed by science, the creation of Earth today represents a fairly minuscule time elapsed to how long our Earth and our universe will last. In a constant age of rapid and constant technological and societal growth, we have obtained so many answers to questions which were deemed to be unanswerable at times in the past before. What was once attributed to gods and inexplainable sources are now seen through the lens of objectivity, science, and logic. Undoubtedly, we know plenty, yet we still have plenty to know. The age-old conflict between science, politics, and religion must be reconciled together in order to live a more prosperous and fulfilling life. The answers held in all three areas may be brought together to fill in the blanks of each other. All three realms have their own respective rights and wrongs, but we as a humanity have the responsibility to sit back, look introspectively as to what truly matters to us. The actions will not only take a direct impact on our lives, but on the lives of many others to come in our generations. We as people have already focused on living a good life. Now it is time to turn and flip the script and focus on the common good. Thank you very much.